According to the Department of the Army pamphlet number 525-7-1, The Art and Science of Psychological Operations, the Secretary of Defense, talking about the United States, is the principal assistant to the president in all matters relating to the Department of Defense and exercises direction, authority, and control over the department. He serves as a member of the National Security Council, and among the several principal military and civilian advisors and staff assistants to the secretary, his assistant secretary for international security affairs has major psychological operations or PSYOPs related responsibilities. Now, psychopolitical operations, remember that, psychopolitical operations, not a conspiracy theory, it's very real, are propaganda campaigns designed to create perpetual tensions and also to manipulate different groups of people to accept the particular climate of opinion that the CFR Council on Foreign Relations seeks to achieve in the world. And so what most Americans believe to be public opinion is in reality carefully crafted and scripted propaganda designed to elicit, let's say, a desired behavioral response from the public. Now, getting people to behave the way you hope they will behave by persuading that it is ultimately in their interest to do so is achieving a desired behavioral response. Now, public opinion polls are, let's call them, qualitative studies that investigate in depth the motivations, also the feelings, the reactions of selected social groups towards acceptance of what? Of the CFR's planned programs. And implementations of these insidious propaganda and public opinion manipulations, including, needless to say, mind control agendas, is executed in the United States by well over 200 think tanks, such as, for example, RAND Corporation, Planning Research Corporation, Hudson Institute, International Institute for Applied Behavioral Science, Heritage Foundations, Brookings Institution, which are overseen and directed in the United States by the Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California. So we have the Rockefeller-funded RAND Institute and the Rockefeller-financed Tavistock Institute in England working together. They investigate the dynamics of evolution, that is, the logic behind why people of various backgrounds and interests and loyalties and information levels and knowledge hold certain opinions. Need to say, if you're the mind bender, let's call them, you need to know why people think the way they do. And so the establishment elitists refer to it as the engineering of consent. Remember that phrase, engineering of consent. You basically build it up, manipulate it enough so that people have the same opinion. It's like molding a piece of cake or a piece of pie, a piece of metal into a particular consensus. And again, you have to understand that Tavistock and like-minded American foundations, they have a single goal in mind. What's that goal? Well, that goal is to break down the psychological strength of the individual and render that person or peoples helpless to oppose the dictates of the world order. And specific RAND policies that became operative include the American nuclear policies, corporate analysis, hundreds of projects for the military, Central Intelligence Agency, in relation to the use, for example, of mind-altering drug like peyote, LSD, etc. And one such project was codenamed, I'm sure you know it, MKUltra. And the covert MKUltra operation, which lasted over 20 years, was the brainchild of Richard Helms, later to become the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, the Ultra part of the MKUltra was the code name for the CIA mind control research program lasting from the 1950s through the 1970s. As the doctors, headed by the famous psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron, former Nazi scientist, for example, they used some of the same techniques as concentration camps, including electroshock, sleep deprivation, memory implantation, memory erasure, sensory modification, psychoactive drug experiments, etc., etc. And ironically, Dr. Cameron had served as a member of the Nuremberg tribunal that heard the war crime cases against the Nazi doctors. Now, the ideology, if we kind of look at it, on a higher level of American foundations, was in fact created by the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London. You see, back in 1921, over 100 years ago, The Duke of Bedford, Marquis of Tavistock, gave a building to the Institute to study what he calls the effects of shell shock on British soldiers who survived World War I. Its purpose, well, to establish the breaking point of men under stress under the direction of the British Army Bureau of Psychological Warfare, commanded by Sir John Rawlins Rees. And so these psychopolitical operations are further subdivided into, on the one hand, strategic psychopolitical operations. What's their focus? Propaganda at small groups of people, such as academia or experts, because these people are capable of influencing public opinion on the one hand, and on the other, tactical psychopolitical operations that focus propaganda at the masses on a large scale, mass communication, for example, media, newspapers, radio, television, textbooks, educational material, art, entertainment, etc., etc. And so both forms of propaganda are used to manipulate public opinion with the objective to do what? To attain foreign policy goals as a kind of a given period, the shorter the better. So, again, this is just me talking about this. So said a group of experts in a pamphlet entitled The Art and Size of Psychological Operations, Case Study of Military Application, Volume 1, published back in 1976 by the Headquarters Department of the United States Army. Now, what's the process by which public opinion is established? Well, look at this. It's actually, the modus operandi is quite simple. An opinion is formulated or created by the dominant Council of Foreign Relations members who belong to an inner circle called the special group. And what's their role? Their role is to plan and coordinate the psychopolitical operations used to manipulate the public, be it American public or global public, it doesn't really matter, and also through a vast intergovernmental undercover infrastructure called the secret team that include the legislative, the executive, and also the judiciary branches of the government, such as, for example, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Treasury, and needless to say, the director of the CIA. Now, those who control television and radio and newspapers, corporations, and today's social media, who have the largest law firms, who run the largest and most prestigious universities and think tanks, who direct the largest private foundations, and also who direct the largest public corporations. Needless to say, all of these people are involved in this mind-bending technique. And so the Council of Foreign Relations secret team, well, it follows the pattern of leadership of all secret societies. In other words, the organization is structured as kind of, think of it as concentric circles, circles within circles, with the exterior layer, which is the secret team, always protecting the more dominant inner membership, which is the special group that coordinates the psychopolitical operations. And by keeping the objectives, also the identities, also the roles played by the members of the secret team hidden, including from the other members of the team, the CFR special group protects itself from hypothetical prosecution by denying its participation in the operation. I have nothing to do with it, they say. It wasn't us. We have nothing to do with this. Where is our name? We're not here. We don't know anything about it. That's how it works. And so to further protect itself from possible prosecution, the CFR does not reveal to every council member what psychopolitical operations are being planned and what their exact role is in the operation. The more exclusive Bilderberg group operates under identical criteria. We talked about it in the earlier episodes, where a lot of the people who are only invited once or twice, they have no idea that in fact there's a global structure behind the Bilderbergers with very concrete globalist agenda. And so the CFR has long been convinced that absolute behavior control is imminent without mankind's self-conscious realization that a crisis is at hand. This is what we're seeing right now. And so the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development of the Liberal National Education Association, that's in the United States, points to the effectiveness of today's sophisticated versions of the old Hegelian dialectical process. And so you have three ground rules that we need to keep in mind. Number one, the carefully crafted deception must contain a glimmer of the truth. That's always the case. Number two, it must be convoluted enough, rendering simple fact-finding absolutely impossible. And this can be accomplished by withholding key information from the public. For example, according to Dale Keeger, a senior writer at Johns Hopkins magazine, very important magazine covering humanities, international affairs, public policy issues in a different form of capitalism. It's an article. This is what he said. The side meant to lose the debate withholds key information that would cause public opinion to go against council plans. And so, for example, in a Marshall Plan, we'll be talking about it in the next episode. In a Marshall Plan psychopolitical operation, George Kennan was for the plan and Lippmann was against it. And Kennan's side won. And years later in his memoirs, Kennan would say that upon reflection, Lippmann was right. And the third point to keep in mind is the use of deception should never discredit a source which may have valuable future potential. And this means that the media, largely owned by the Council of Foreign Relations corporations, must play the credibility card. And with the help from the media, for example, the CFR has already persuaded people around the world that the resurgence of nationalism, the growth of fundamentalism, and of religious intolerance is a global threat. Well, we know that, because we've seen it on the covers of every major newspaper magazine in the world. Another thing, Council on Foreign Relations, they create and deliver these psychopolitical operations by doing what? By manipulating people's reality through what's called a tactic of deception, placing, for example, council members on both sides of the debate. Okay, you control the dialectic, you control the left and the right. And so the deception is complete when the public is led to believe that its own best interests are being served while the CFR policy is being carried out. And since the Council on Foreign Relations has major leverage within the legal, also legislative, also court systems, it has very little to fear from any official quote-unquote inquiry, and that it is literally free to create the perception in the general public, unable to comprehend the extent of the deceit, that the laws are being followed. You have the lawyers, you have the legislators, you have the judges elected, supported, and also protected by the council. Well, they're committing blatant illegalities to further CFR's aims, or to hide, for example, improprieties, which, if exposed, would cause great public outcry. And again, an additional tactic of deception used to achieve the aims of the Council of Foreign Relations is to finance and oversee a legitimate study by a respected organization with the express aim of manipulating public opinion by clever use of the right language. We're told, well, so this isn't any kind of a secret society. Look, this is a very important study. We're doing it on your behalf, in your name, and for your best interests. And people, unfortunately, a lot of the times believe that to be the case. The Council on Foreign Relations uses tax-exempt foundations as kind of a principal conduit to funnel money into favorable policymaking processes. Nearly 40% of all foundation assets were controlled by the top 10 or top 11 foundations, who in turn were controlled by none other than Council on Foreign Relations. And furthermore, the directors or the trustees have great latitude in directing the use of foundation monies to underwrite research, investigate social problems, assist universities, establish think tanks, endow museums, always and as long as the individuals in question play the game according to the rules of Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderbergers. Now, for example, the RAND National Defense Research Institute is a federally funded Council on Foreign Relations think tank sponsored by the Office of the Secretary of Defense and also headed by Council on Foreign Relations members Michael Rich. And the clients include the Pentagon, AT&T, Chase Manhattan Bank, IBM, the Republican Party, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Department of Energy, NASA, and the interlocking leadership between the trustees at RAND and the Ford and the Rockefeller and the Carnegie Foundations. That's a classic case of CFR Bilderberger modus operandi. It's always interlocked, concentric circles within circles. And the Ford Foundation, for example, gave $1 million to RAND back in 1952, an incredible sum of money. At the time when the president of the Ford Foundation was simultaneously the chairman of RAND. Okay, so again, if you kind of go back and understand how the structures of these foundations work and how they are interlocked with some of these powerful global organizations, such as the Bilderbergers, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, it makes it easier to understand how these powers behind the scene operate on a global scale. Let me give you another example. In July 1992, influenced by the uncertainty of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, also alarm at the impending changes in Eastern Europe, RAND brought together the leading world experts to discuss the problems in the new world environment. And the resulting document was revised, that is, again, molded to the objectives of RAND and published at the Summer Institute report titled Peacekeeping and Peacemaking After the Cold War. And according to the report, the Secretary General of the United Nations defines peace building as post-conflict action. Now, let me say it again. Okay, post-conflict action. And the Secretary General has linked preventive diplomacy with preventive deployment of military forces. And so Rand stresses that the Secretary General, his agenda for peace, emphasizes the need for governments to share information on political or military situations. And so doing, he's asking for an expansion of intelligence sharing. You understand that? And suddenly the big brother is on a global level. We have intelligence sharing, so everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And considering that all of these everybody's are the people on a supranational level who belong to these think tanks and foundations and the secretive organizations such as the Bilderbergers Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, it makes sense what Rand is saying in their report. Again, I emphasize that Rand's expertise in misinformation and manipulating large groups of people is one of the key attributes of this Rockefeller CFR funded corporations.